My name is Sophia Hall. I'm a supervising attorney at Lawyers for Civil Rights. LCR is a nonprofit based in Boston, Massachusetts. We've been in the city for a little over 50 years, and we provide free legal representation and support to communities of color and immigrant communities who experience discrimination in various places in their life. So as a civil rights lawyer, what I know is that voting, the right to vote, is not one that was easily gained for many of us. And that right in itself is, in my opinion, from what all other rights flow. If you can't vote, then you don't have an opportunity to speak for yourself in any other facet of your life, in your home, in the taxes you pay, in the representation that you have, in the place that you work. And so they're critically important sort of battleground issues that civil rights attorneys have always cared about. What I frequently hear is in this era and in Massachusetts, which is in many times considered a very progressive place, why are voting rights important here? And what I have to tell you is that even in a place that is not considered a swing state or highly political per se in its outcome, it's still critically important that people have the right to exercise their activity, their process of democracy. So basically, we have to make sure that people can still cast a meaningful ballot, no matter where they are or what the outcome is. Because if we don't protect this right, then we're not protecting democracy. In Massachusetts, unfortunately, despite its myth of modernity, we still have lots of places where we have work to do. And one of the places that's most visible is in our election laws. I like to tell people that if I had my way, voting would be as easy as breathing. And in Massachusetts, we're not there yet. So in Massachusetts, over the last 5 or 6 years, we finally begin to see some progress in terms of our election laws. About 5 or so years ago, Massachusetts passed a law for early voting, the first time in the Commonwealth. And then very recently, on September 1st, we saw early voting in our primary season for the very first time. This is an opportunity to expand people's access to the ballot and make it easier for people to cast their vote, so critically important. The last legislative cycle, we saw a law passed to allow automatic voter registration, which basically is an opt-out instead of an opt-in system, meaning the standard is you should be registered to vote when you engage with government to renew your license or anything else, rather than having to actively and affirmatively request that right. That is something that's still being put into play, but is great that we now have that on the books. What we don't have in Massachusetts that we're still fighting for is election day registration. In Massachusetts, you're required to register to vote 20 days before the election. And if you miss that deadline, then you lose your right to vote. You just won't have an opportunity. And as you can imagine, we all have very busy lives. And so you don't always get to register in the way that you might like. And when you find that the election cycle has come up, when you're seeing it on the news, when people are talking about it in your home, you're getting really excited about it, you might want to go to register to vote, but then can't because the deadline's passed. We, again, want to make voting as easy as breathing. So here we're trying to pass a law so that you can register right up until election day. In fact, you could walk into your polling site, register to vote, and then cast your vote all in one moment. That's something that the Commonwealth has not yet done. Other places in the country have same-day registration. Other places in the country also have no excuse absentee voting, which Massachusetts did not have before this current election cycle. Other places in the country also have vote by mail and have had vote by mail even before COVID. The nice thing about, well, perhaps not the nice thing, but I guess the silver lining of this pandemic has been it's forced Massachusetts to modernize. And so now we do have a vote by mail system in Massachusetts. And if many of you watched the outcome of the September 1st primary, you'll know we had record high rates of voting, and more than half of those were cast by mail. So clearly it's something that is expanding the right to vote for many people. Yeah, so it's a great question. Many people think that the voting system is fairly simple. You register to vote, you go and vote on election day, no problem. But unfortunately, for those populations who have been disenfranchised, who have been sort of excluded from the right to vote, any barrier that exists potentially is the reason why they won't cast a ballot on election day. So here in Massachusetts, since we do need to modernize and we do have some archaic features to our election system, those can be barriers to people's right to vote. So for example, in Massachusetts, we have something called the inactive voter list. You can become inactive if you have not completed 2 consecutive local town censuses or surveys. That has nothing to do with whether or not you vote. It's simply a survey you receive on a postcard usually from your local town or city. And if you don't fill it out for 2 years, then they take you off the normal register polls and they put you in a separate book. And that book is called the inactive voter list. So when you go to vote, if for some reason they don't find you in the book, it might be because you're inactive. And that barrier right there, just troubleshooting that issue and understanding that process is some of the reasons, unfortunately, that a voter might be turned away at the polls. If they don't know to suggest, hey, I might be in that other poll book because I might be listed as inactive, because I might have not filled out my survey, although I know that's unrelated to voting, can you check for me? That might be the reason a person can't vote on election day. Similarly, if we see really long lines, if we have machine errors, in this world where we're seeing gentrification across the board, but we don't necessarily keep up with our demographics, except for every 10 years during a census, communities might change and language assistance might be needed that's not legally required, or accessibility for people with handicaps or disabilities, ramps, e-poll books, those features that allow the blind to be able to vote, those things might be needed, but not necessarily readily available. So we've told you some of the problems that people have to troubleshoot on election day. Massachusetts election protection is part of the nation's largest nonpartisan voter protection program. Here in Massachusetts, Lawyers for Civil Rights, along with a host of community partners, spearheads that program. So on election day, we put more than 500 volunteers on the ground to help people who are having exactly these issues at their polling sites, to make sure that people have the information they need so that they don't leave, but instead cast their vote. In addition, we run a statewide hotline. We open up at 6:30 in the morning, so 30 minutes before the polls open, and we stay open until 8:30 at night, so 30 minutes after the polls close, to make sure that if people need help, they can call 1-866-OUR-VOTE and get help in real time to ensure that they can, again, cast a meaningful ballot on election day. Volunteers are critically important because they are the eyes and ears on the ground. They are the people that will be able to troubleshoot problems for voters. And while it can seem sort of like a small thing to do, the impact can be really significant. So, for example, if a voter is on the ground at a polling site and there's a really long line and it's 7:55 and people show up and say, I know that the polls are supposed to close at 8. I think I probably should just leave because I'm not going to get through this line. Our volunteers are trained to let people know, well, yes, if you get in line before 8 o'clock, you are legally entitled to vote, no matter what time it is. But without that volunteer on the ground, the voter might not know that, and they might just simply leave instead of casting their vote. So it's a really meaningful effort. The only request is that you participate in about a 1-hour training to learn election law, and you participate in a shift that's at least 3.5 hours. So minimum requirement is 3.5 hours on election day and a 1-hour training in advance. All of this is going to be done virtually. You'll be able to engage in these opportunities in a socially distanced or virtual way to stay safe during COVID. And if you have any questions about that, we're certainly happy to answer. If you're interested in signing up, you can email me directly at shall@lawyersforcivilrights.org.